Hi you guys! Today we're going to be doing some felted succulents. So I just have a couple examples in front of you guys. You can also feel free to Google your favorite succulent plant or Google a couple pictures and use them as inspiration. What's really fun about succulents, and these especially, right? They're hard to kill, these impossible to kill. And so you can felt your own. Today we're gonna step through how to make just one of them, but you can see I'll kind of go through this process as well. This one kind of resembles a little bit more of a snake plant or an aloe. This one's kind of more of its kind of long petals or long big leaves. And then this guy is kind of a little bit smaller, you can see him. Just a few little petals that branch out. I'm gonna be demoing this one today and just a little bit of this one. That should give you kind of the basics to start with. So I'm gonna move these kind of out of the way here for you guys. What you guys have in your pack is a foam block, which will be your base to work on. Then you got your needle. These are felting needles and they're specific to this process because they're a special needle, right? So felting is the process of condensing fibers together to make them harder and harder, and they get pretty stiff on us while we're doing this, and it kind of gives us the structure for this project. So I'm gonna pull this needle up, and if you guys can see there, just to point out kind of what makes this special. These needles are barbed, and so the barbs go directionally for this needle so that it's pulling those fibers inward as you're working. These are still they're super sharp needles, so you wanna make sure you're being careful, watching where your fingers are. Might be good to just make sure that you're kind of prepared in case you do kind of poke yourself. It's just a little tiny poke, and so probably no big deal, just ready to be prepared there, and make sure you're watching your fingers. The first process for this is you've got your little roving, and so this is just kind of a traditional polyfill roving, which is nice. It's gonna be the interior for these pieces, the body structure, and then we're gonna be covering them like this one is in that nice colored roving that you have. In your pack, you probably got little baggies that look like this. So you'll be using these in the end, so I'll step by step through that with you. But to get started, we're gonna start with the part by part construction. So each of these, I'm gonna break it down for you, comes out of our little planter, and each of them is just petals. And so we're gonna go through how to kind of construct the petals. Depends on how you would like it to be. So I'd have your little pot in front of you so you can kind of construct them together how you want them as you go. That'll tell you how many petals you want, how many components you'll need. If you've got a picture that you're referencing as well, you can kind of look at that plant and see kind of what's in their little pot. Remember though, if it's a bigger pot that's in the picture, you're gonna need to scale down a little bit. But then we're gonna start with a little chunk of roving. You just wanna grab a little. This is pretty small, doesn't even fill my hand there. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take that needle and you're just going to start keeping your hands kind of clear of this. Start poking. Those barbs on that fiber is gonna pull it in. So you just wanna kind of poke, 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 poke. This is a process that'll really get any of those little aggressions out, right? Any cabin fever that we've got going right now, you can work out through this. I would say if you wanna do this on your couch, you wanna do this kind of somewhere you can be comfy, make sure you're on a hard surface. That way, if you do end up going through your foam, you're not sitting on your lap and you poke yourself in the leg or anything like that. Make sure that you're being safe for that. So just give yourself a hard surface, something to work on. And then poke, 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 poke. And the nice thing about this roving is you kind of poke the center. You wanna make sure you're moving it around quite a bit, but you can then kind of start pulling it in and just folding it over. And then once again, keep your fingers clear. Just kind of hold that in place with a little bit of pressure. And then continue to poke. Like I said, you wanna move this around a lot, otherwise these fibers are gonna get caught in your foam block. It totally happens, no big deal, just pull them off gently from the bottom. And then once again, you can just kind of start again, fold it over a little bit, poke, 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 poke. This is gonna take a little bit. This is a tedious process. That's kind of what I love about this process. It's tedious, but it's so rewarding and relaxing. And as you see it come together, you're like, oh man, been working on this and it's finally there. So continue to move it, flip it upside down to continue to poke any kind of corners. If you want this specific shape, so these ones are kind of a teardrop shape, kind of a larger teardrop at the bottom, or you can kind of even call them almost a heart shape. There is a little bit of a pocket, although you can't see it very much up on the video. And so what you'll do as you start to fold it in, you just wanna make sure you're starting that shape. For these snake plant ones, pull one apart here. What you're gonna do is you're gonna just start folding it over and over in that vertical kind of what will be kind of a more cylindrical shape, tubular shape, if you will. And so that will be how you kind of form those. You'll just continuously fold it over for that. But for this guy, we're going to use that more circular, a little bit pointier shape, like a teardrop. And so you just kind of gently fold the edges in where you'd like. Once again, kind of gently pull your fingers across, make sure they're out of the way for this. It's not the worst thing to get poked. I mean, we've all been poked before, right? So we all know it's all right, not gonna hurt forever, but it does sting a bit, so just be aware. And then you can kind of flip it over just because you wanna work this from all angles. That way, as you're working, you're making sure that your whole piece is getting attention. You're not gonna turn it over and be like, oh, well, look at that. Totally forgot a whole space. So just make sure you're flipping it over, making sure you're working it from all angles, kind of getting that shape you'd like all over the place, all around. And then as you start to get the general shape form, we've got kind of that point up here and that roundness. You wanna just kind of continue to push it. Got a little bit of buildup on the foam. You can just pull that out. Just continue to push it and continue to poke away with that needle. The other thing is, as you're doing this, you wanna make sure for the needles that you're going straight in and straight out of our fibers and our foam. If you bend or put that in there and try to bend it around and move it, it's gonna probably put a little bit more torque on this needle than it can handle, and it can break on you. That's not a huge deal, it does happen. Just make sure that you're being safe. We don't want these to get stuck. They are sharp, and so if it does break, make sure that you kind of pull your piece aside. If it's in the piece, be really gentle with your hands to make sure you don't get poked. And then if it ends up in your foam, you can kind of gently push down and you can kind of pull that out of there, kind of with a pair of tweezers would be great, but yeah, no big deal. So like I said, continue, poke. We're gonna do this for each component. So once you kind of get one going, you can start the others as well. And the nice thing is, depending on your succulent, whichever one you are making, you wanna also give yourself some variance in their size. So you'll do a couple of like kind of larger leaves, and then you'll also do a couple smaller ones, making sure that you're kind of laying them out as you go. That way you know what you're looking for. If you have a vision of what you want as you start it, it usually turns out a little better because your brain just works that way, right? As long as you can kind of say, okay, I want this one a little bit smaller, I want it shaped kind of like this, your brain is going to start pushing that, and your hands are gonna work together with that to make sure that it's happening. You just wanna be pretty cognitive about that, making sure you're doing what you're wanting for that shape. And the nice thing is too, these can get a little wonky sometimes. If you get to the point and you're like, oh, it's getting a little more round, you can just pull back at those fibers. If you poke it in anywhere that you're feeling like, oh, it's getting a little bit too round, you can kind of straighten out that edge or give it a little bit more of an angle. Same thing from the other side. Now we're gonna make it a little bit more of a traditional teardrop. It's not gonna be as fat, but so you can push that shape quite a bit, even from the sides. Wanna make sure your fingers are clear if you're gonna do this, but you can push right in from the sides. Sometimes you can kind of poke it into your fiber, your foam a little bit to do that, or even if you hold it just with your index finger, just so you make sure you give it a little bit of stability. You just want to make sure you're being safe for yourself. And then we're gonna look for these to kind of condense to the point you can kind of, it'll be hard for you guys to see here, but you can see that those are still, this one's still pretty loose. So I'll kind of put them up to the camera here. You can kind of see it just by the fibers. Kind of block myself out for a second. You can kind of tell the difference in the fiber there, just because one of them, like this one, is far less condensed than this bottom one is. However, the other way to judge this is this little patch of kind of muscle in every tissue right here between your thumb and your forefinger. If your hand is loose and relaxed, that kind of tension that's right there, that is what we're looking for. That'll be kind of what you want this to feel like. It'll be pretty much the same. All right, so work through and get your components all made. Like I said, depending on how you like your succulent, for this guy in the pot right here, this little guy, this has 6 components. You could even add a 7th if you wanted like an extra little guy in the middle there, but there you go. That one is 6 components. This one, that the leaves are a lot thinner, this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 components with a little bit one that's thicker in the middle. And this guy, he could probably use another couple, but he also has 6. So I would say maybe 8 for one if it's a snake plant to fit in this, depending on how thick you are making them. So, you know, between 6 and 8 is probably where you're looking for these component pieces. And then you just want to continue working them. Like I said, once they're kind of poked enough that they're at that firmness that we're looking for right between the thumb and forefinger, then you are ready to start constructing and getting the color on them, and that'll be our next step that we'll jump into. So build the rest of those components and we'll meet back in just a minute for round 2.